No one knew why she only wears trousers, until her biggest secret was exposed. Nobody in the office ever said it directly to her face, but everyone had an opinion about Evelyn Noah's trousers. They kept wondering why a beautiful girl with a figure like hers would wear only trousers. Every day, without fail, she walked into the Washington, D.C. headquarters wearing trousers. Slim trousers, wide-leg trousers, work pants, soft fabric trousers with pockets. She never wore a skirt or a dress. Some people thought she had a weird fashion style. Others assumed she was self-conscious. A few people, the kind who always think they're reading people correctly, convinced themselves she was just one of those women who hated being girly. But whatever they thought, they kept it to themselves, until something happened one Wednesday morning at 8:47 a.m. Evelyn sat at her desk in the open office space, sipping coffee she didn't even like but needed because she'd stayed up the night before fixing a data report. Around her, people typed, scrolled, pretended to be busy, the usual corporate routine. She put on her headphones, planning to zone out for a moment, when she saw a new email pop up on her screen. Subject: Dress code requirement. Thursday's investor dinner, mandatory. At first, she didn't think much of it. Their company loved forcing dress codes on events no one wanted to attend. She clicked it open casually. But as soon as her eyes moved to the second line, she blinked twice, thinking she misread it. All female staff are required to wear dresses. No exceptions. Her hand tightened a little around her coffee cup. She stared at the line again, reading it a few more times just to make sure she wasn't imagining it. But there was. Clear as day. Wear a dress. No exceptions. She didn't visibly react, but the silence around her changed. It was like the whole row of desks suddenly tuned into her reaction. People didn't turn their heads directly, but you could see it, the slight tilt of an ear, a coworker who suddenly typed slower, the way someone whispered across the aisle. It wasn't surprising. Her clothes had been the quiet topic of the office for months. She didn't dress oddly, but she stood out. She was tall, 5'8", curved, hourglass-shaped, thick in a way people noticed immediately. Beautiful face, long lashes, soft brown curly hair that she usually pinned up during work. She almost always looked put together. So the trousers, every day, no matter the weather, made people talk. You'd think grown adults in a professional setting would mind their business, but apparently that was too much to expect. Evelyn breathed out slowly, closed the email, grabbed her water bottle, and stood up. Someone behind her muttered, not even trying to hide the amusement, "Well, looks like she's finally cornered." A small chuckle followed. She didn't react. She didn't even turn. She just walked toward the restroom hallway, wanting a moment alone. But before she reached the corner, another coworker said, just loud enough for a few people to hear, "I wonder what she's hiding. It must be serious if she refuses a simple dress." More laughter. Evelyn kept walking, but the comments stuck. Not because they hurt, she wasn't bothered by random opinions. But because she had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this type of attention. The moment she got inside a restroom stall, she locked the door, sat on the toilet seat lid fully clothed, and let out a slow exhale. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was exhaustion. She had rebuilt her whole life around not being stared at. And now, because of one company dinner, everything she'd been protecting was about to unravel. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and reread the dress code email. It was clear, strict, and signed by her manager, Lauren. Of course. She put her phone away and stared at her own legs under the trousers. The left one real. The right one. She tapped the artificial knee lightly with her knuckles. Just to ground herself. Just to check it was still her reality. She couldn't help but remember how it all happened 3 years ago. She was driving home from the outskirts of Baltimore after visiting a friend. It was drizzling, traffic was light, the night was normal. She wasn't drunk, tired, or doing anything reckless. She was just driving. A delivery truck jumped a yellow light at a bad intersection. She didn't even have time to react. There was a loud metal impact, a crunch, then nothing. She woke up in a hospital hours later with dry lips, a headache, and a doctor calmly telling her something that didn't feel real. They couldn't save her right leg. Most people imagine a dramatic breakdown, but that didn't happen. She just lay there listening, not crying, not yelling. She was too shocked to even feel anything. It was like her mind didn't believe it yet. She nodded while the doctor explained, then stared at the hospital's ceiling for a long while. Her new life started in physical therapy, parallel bars, cold floors, long sessions where she had to relearn balance. She did it quietly without wanting sympathy. Her family supported her, but she always downplayed it. She didn't want to be treated differently. When she finally got her prosthetic and learned how to walk confidently, she made a personal rule. No revealing clothes that made people stare. No dresses. No skirts. No shorts. Nothing that made people ask questions or show pity. Trousers became her shield. And the more people didn't notice, the more she realized how much easier life felt. So now, 3 years later, this stupid dress code email felt like someone ripping away the privacy she had fought to protect. After sitting quietly in the restroom for a few minutes, she washed her hands, fixed her hair, and went back to her desk. Her laptop had another notification. Please come to meeting room 2A. From Lauren. When she walked into the room, Lauren was already seated, pretending to be busy sorting papers. She didn't look up at first. Sit, she said, in that tone people use when they're trying to sound authoritative but not rude. Evelyn sat, calm and collected. So, Lauren began, you saw the email. Yes, Evelyn answered. Well, I hope there won't be any issues. This investor dinner is extremely important. The company needs this deal, and the dress code is part of the formal presentation. Evelyn asked simply, can I wear a long dress? Something midi-length? No, Lauren answered immediately. The dress needs to be above the knee. It's standard for this type of event. Who created that standard? Evelyn asked, confused by the logic. The CEO approved it, Lauren said defensively. Everyone else is following it. We can't make exceptions just because someone doesn't like dresses. Evelyn didn't correct her. There was no point. Explaining her prosthetic would only create more questions, more looks, more office gossip. And it wouldn't change the dress code anyway. I'll figure it out, she said and stood up. And just like that, Lauren relaxed, satisfied she had handled it. That evening, Evelyn went to a boutique in Georgetown. The sales lady kept handing her colorful dresses and trying to convince her to try things she clearly didn't want. Eventually Evelyn found something plain. A simple black midi dress, soft fabric, not too tight, subtle, nothing that showed the outline of her prosthetic. She didn't even try it on. She just bought it and left. On the way home, she found herself adjusting her right leg repeatedly, making sure the fit was okay, making sure the ankle joint wouldn't click too loudly tomorrow. She didn't want people staring at her feet. She didn't want coworkers whispering again. She didn't want the embarrassment she knew was coming. But she didn't have a choice. Thursday evening. New York City venue. A luxury rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline. The company flew everyone in early. People were excited, dressed up, taking pictures for Instagram stories. When Evelyn walked through the lobby wearing the dress, the room shifted. Conversations paused. People turned their heads. Some did it slowly, like they didn't want to be obvious. Others weren't subtle at all. One woman from HR whispered to another, oh wow, she actually wore it. A guy near the bar said, look at how she walks, what is that? Amanda, the same coworker who always had something to say, made a face and said loudly, so that's why she never wears dresses. Several people laughed softly. Evelyn kept walking like she didn't hear anything. Face calm, back straight, steps steady. Her prosthetic foot made a faint tapping sound whenever she shifted weight. Not loud, but noticeable. She headed straight to a quiet seat by the window. She didn't engage with anyone. She looked out at the night view, trying to keep her mind steady. Then, like clockwork, her manager Lauren approached. There you are, she said with a smile that didn't look real. You look nice. But Lauren's eyes dropped immediately to Evelyn's right leg, staring far too long for it to be subtle. Evelyn looked away, pretending not to notice. Lauren leaned in slightly and whispered, just try not to draw attention to yourself tonight, okay? Let the executives handle the investor. It was the kind of thing only a manager with no emotional awareness would say. Evelyn didn't argue. She simply nodded and Lauren walked away, satisfied. Everyone kept glancing at her. Some whispered, is that a brace or something? Maybe she has a deformity. She walks funny. Did she have surgery? Oh my God, look at her knee. It wasn't panic Evelyn felt. It was an old familiar discomfort, the kind that made her want to shrink into herself. But she stayed composed. She ordered a small drink, held the glass gently, and waited for the night to be over. She didn't know that the biggest twist of her life was about to happen. Evelyn's eyes followed the soft glow of the city skyline outside the window. The lights of New York flickered in the distance, beautiful but distant, almost like a world that had nothing to do with the tense, quiet energy in the room. She took a slow sip from her glass, trying to calm the tight knot in her stomach, but it was useless. Every few seconds, she felt the weight of the stares and whispers that hadn't stopped since she entered. Her coworkers had assumed that wearing a dress would break her composure, that they'd finally see what they wanted to see, the secret she'd been hiding. She didn't like the word, secret. It made it sound shameful. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd survived an accident, adapted, and kept going. But in that room, it didn't feel like survival. It felt like being examined under a microscope. Amanda, her coworker from HR who had made the "so that's why she never wears dresses" comment earlier, leaned against the bar with that same smirk plastered on her face. Evelyn felt her gaze flit across the room, catching the sideways glances and whispered remarks. The same old humiliation that she had worked so hard to avoid was happening all over again, just as it always did in social settings where people notice difference. She tried to focus on something else, the drink in her hand, the view outside, anything, But her thoughts kept getting hijacked by the noises in the room. Chairs scraping against marble floors. People laughing quietly at jokes that didn't reach her ears but seemed aimed at her. The clicking of her prosthetic foot against the polished floor every time she shifted slightly. And then he arrived. Arthur Santiago. The man she had heard about since joining the company. The investor who had the power to either make or break their firm. The same man her manager, Lauren, had described in every meeting as unflappable, brilliant, intimidating. He didn't rush in with a fanfare. No photographers. No entourage. Just a single man in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He walked with the calm, deliberate steps of someone who was used to being observed, used to being the center of attention, but also used to ignoring the petty distractions around him. The room subtly changed when he entered. Conversations dimmed, laughter faded. Everyone straightened, some standing almost reflexively. Evelyn didn't move. She stayed seated, barely breathing, her fingers wrapped lightly around the stem of her glass. Arthur's gaze swept over the crowd, not lingering on anyone too long. But then, slowly, his eyes landed on Evelyn. She felt it immediately, that sense of being noticed, not for gossip or mockery, but with a quiet, unspoken recognition. She looked away instinctively, staring out the window again. Her coworkers, of course, noticed it. Whispers started up again, but softer this time, tinged with nervousness rather than amusement. People were beginning to realize, slowly, very slowly, that this investor wasn't someone you joked about. Arthur approached the table where Evelyn sat. He didn't speak to anyone else first. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down without hesitation. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying enough presence that the room seemed to shift slightly. Evelyn blinked, surprised. She had expected cold politeness or a perfunctory, "hello," but not this. She nodded. "Of course." He placed his hands casually on the table, a small, confident smile on his face. "I'm Arthur. And you are?" "Evelyn Noah," she replied. Her voice didn't waver, though she felt her chest tighten. Arthur's gaze didn't flick to her leg. He didn't ask any questions. He just sat, relaxed, like he was waiting to see how she would handle herself in a room full of tension. "What do you do here at the company, Evelyn?" he asked. "Simple, straightforward. I handle data strategy," she said. "Mostly analytics and reporting for our product launches." He said. "That sounds more interesting than half the pitches I've heard tonight." He gave a small, almost amused nod. "Do you enjoy it?" "I do," she replied. "It's challenging." Arthur's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer. There was a quiet patience in the way he listened, the kind that made someone feel like they weren't being judged, even in a room where everyone else was doing exactly that. At that moment, one of her co-workers, Spencer, walked past and made the mistake of speaking loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Evelyn, careful not to poke him with your sharp edges," he said, the kind of comment meant to get a laugh. A few people behind him snickered. Evelyn felt her stomach drop, that familiar heat creeping up her neck. She took a deep breath and ignored him. Arthur, however, didn't. He raised his head, his expression calm but firm, like a quiet storm. "I've been listening," he said, "and I notice a lot of people here have no idea how to behave in a professional setting." Everyone froze. Evelyn could feel the eyes of her co-workers shifting nervously. Spencer's face went pale. Amanda stopped laughing mid-chuckle. Lauren, her manager, suddenly looked very small. Arthur's gaze went back to Evelyn and he smiled, not in pity, but in acknowledgement. "And you," he said softly, "seem to handle this far better than anyone else." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her glass, unsure whether she wanted to laugh, cry, or just disappear. But the tension in her chest eased slightly. For the first time all night, she didn't feel entirely exposed. He leaned back slightly in his chair and surveyed the room. "Let's make something clear," he said, his voice carrying. "I'm here to invest in potential, not drama. If I see people undermining each other or being childish, that affects my decision. It matters. A lot." Everyone held their breath. Even Lauren didn't speak. Arthur's eyes then flicked briefly to her right leg. Just a glance. Not judgmental. Not intrusive. Just a quiet acknowledgement. Evelyn's heart, which had been racing, skipped a beat. That glance said more than words ever could. He had noticed, not in shock, not in mockery, but in recognition. The room seemed heavier after that. The whispers stopped. People straightened nervously, some lowering their heads in awkward realization that this investor wasn't someone to test. Arthur leaned forward slightly. "I've been in your shoes," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "Lost my leg a few years back. Motorcycle accident. Took me 2 years to walk without thinking about it constantly. 3 years to stop caring what people thought." Evelyn froze, not out of fear, but surprise. She hadn't expected him to reveal that, especially in front of everyone. A soft, Collective murmur ran through the room. Heads turned. People blinked. They hadn't anticipated this level of honesty. Arthur's gaze returned to Evelyn. And you, handling everything with calm and composure tonight, deserve recognition. Not mockery. You've shown more resilience in this single evening than most have in their entire careers. The room went silent. Evelyn looked at him, unsure how to respond. Words failed her. For once, there was no mockery. No judgment. Just understanding. He then turned to the CEO, who had been nervously hovering near the head of the table. Here's my condition, Arthur said. I will invest in this company, but I expect change. Immediate change. The CEO swallowed hard. Anything. Name it. Evelyn, Arthur said. She should be promoted. Effective immediately. And Lauren's position will be reassigned. If I see anyone treat her, or anyone else, the way I've seen tonight, the deal is off. Gasps ran through the room. Evelyn blinked several times, unable to fully process it. The same people who had whispered about her leg, mocked her posture, and tried to humiliate her, now sat in stunned silence. Arthur returned his attention to Evelyn, his tone softening. You've been professional, competent, and calm. You deserve this. Take it. You've earned it. Evelyn's throat tightened. Relief, disbelief, and pride all collided at once. She simply nodded, trying to keep her composure. Words didn't feel necessary. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. The energy in the room shifted completely. Amanda avoided looking at her. Spencer seemed ready to shrink into the floor. Lauren's face was pale, rigid. And for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel like she had to hide her prosthetic. She could sit, walk, and breathe freely, knowing that someone powerful understood, and that her value wasn't measured by anyone's shallow opinions. Arthur then did something subtle but unforgettable. He lifted the hem of his tuxedo slightly, revealing his prosthetic leg. The room collectively froze again. No one laughed. No one whispered. No one questioned. Arthur simply smiled at Evelyn. You're not alone, he said, softly. And you never should have felt like you had to hide. Not here. Not anywhere that matters. The rest of the evening passed differently. Conversations flowed naturally. People stopped staring. No more whispered jokes. Evelyn found herself actually enjoying the dinner, laughing at a few appropriate jokes, nodding along with discussions, and even sharing a brief anecdote about a recent project she had led. By the time dessert came, the room felt lighter. Evelyn didn't feel scrutinized. She didn't feel shame. She felt respected. And unexpectedly, she felt powerful. When the dinner ended, the company staff were buzzing quietly among themselves. They still processed what had happened, but there was no malice left. Evelyn left the restaurant last, walking steadily, the prosthetic foot clicking lightly against the floor. This time, she didn't shrink. This time, she didn't feel the familiar burn of humiliation. Back at the hotel, she sent a quick text to her family. Dinner went well. You'd be proud. For once, I didn't feel invisible. And for the first time in years, she went to sleep that night without dreading the morning. The morning after the investor dinner, Washington, D.C. felt different to Evelyn. Not because the streets had changed or the air was fresher, but because she herself had changed. The heavy knot of anxiety that usually sat in her stomach when she prepared for work had lifted. She didn't feel exposed. She didn't feel like the target of whispers and sideways glances. She arrived at the office earlier than usual. The lobby was buzzing with the usual morning energy. Coffee in hand, elevator waits, people greeting each other with casual half-smiles, but Evelyn moved through it differently. She held herself taller, her steps deliberate, her prosthetic leg no longer a secret she needed to hide. When she walked past the main reception, a few people who had whispered about her trousers or her leg the previous day stopped mid-conversation. Their mouths opened slightly, then closed. Evelyn ignored them. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Lauren, her manager, spotted her from across the floor. Her face, usually composed with forced authority, was tight with uncertainty. She walked briskly to Evelyn's desk. Evelyn, she said, voice slightly higher pitched than normal, can I have a word? Evelyn nodded. Sure. Lauren led her to an empty conference room. Once inside, she turned to Evelyn, attempting her usual managerial posture. But it faltered. She was clearly off balance, something Evelyn had never seen before. I just wanted to say, last night, Lauren started, hesitating, I wasn't aware of, she trailed off, and Evelyn raised an eyebrow, silently prompting her to continue. Lauren exhaled sharply. Of your situation. I didn't realize. I might have been insensitive. Evelyn blinked. Not with surprise, but more with the calm observation of someone who had been through much worse. She nodded slowly. Thank you, she said simply. No apology required. No explanation necessary. Lauren shifted uncomfortably. Arthur made some decisions last night. About promotions. About positions. You, her voice faltered again. Evelyn waited. You're being promoted, Lauren said finally, the words leaving her mouth like a weight she didn't want to carry. Effective immediately. I'll be reassigned. As per his instructions. Evelyn's face remained calm. Inside, a small surge of satisfaction rolled through her, but she kept it hidden. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to smile. Just recognition was enough. Lauren's shoulders slumped slightly. She tried to maintain composure, but Evelyn could see the panic in her eyes, the sudden realization that the old dynamics of the office had shifted overnight. You've earned it, Lauren added awkwardly. Arthur was very clear. Anyone who undermines you or treats you poorly after this, it won't be tolerated. Evelyn nodded. Understood. By mid-morning, the office buzzed with news. Whispers circulated, but this time they weren't mocking. They were cautious. People glanced at Evelyn differently, with curiosity, maybe even respect. Amanda, the coworker who had mocked her most directly, avoided her gaze entirely. Evelyn noticed, and for a brief moment, it gave her a small, private sense of satisfaction. Spencer, too, seemed unsure where to look. His previous smirks and jokes evaporated overnight. Her new office, a small corner space with a window overlooking a bustling street, had been set up by Lauren herself. Evelyn didn't need it really, but the gesture was symbolic. Her position wasn't just about authority. It was a statement. She wasn't invisible anymore. When she logged into her computer, a message from Arthur popped up in her inbox. Evelyn, I was impressed last night. Keep doing what you're doing. You're capable of more than anyone in that office realizes. Let me know if you need anything. Evelyn stared at the message for a moment, a small smile tugging at her lips. She didn't reply immediately. She didn't need to. The message was affirmation enough. The rest of the day moved quickly. Evelyn reviewed reports, planned the next product launch, and handled meetings with a calm, steady confidence she hadn't fully felt before. Her coworkers were polite, cautious, but noticeably less judgmental. When she passed Amanda in the hallway, Amanda murmured, "Congratulations." Her voice was almost too quiet to hear. Evelyn nodded once. That was all. No need for conversation. Words weren't necessary to communicate that boundaries had shifted. Lunch came, and Evelyn chose to eat in the small break room alone. She wasn't avoiding people. She simply preferred space to process. For the first time in years, she felt that space wasn't a protective necessity. She could exist openly, without fear of whispers or judgment. Even in casual conversation, someone asking about weekend plans, another mentioning a restaurant downtown, she noticed the subtle shift. People no longer assumed she was fragile or different. They treated her like a competent, confident adult. Not a subject for ridicule. A few weeks later, Arthur returned to Washington, D.C. for a follow-up meeting. Evelyn had prepared for it with a professional thoroughness she had cultivated over the years. Reports were ready. Presentations were organized. Every detail checked. When he entered the office this time, Evelyn didn't feel the tension she had felt in New York. She greeted him calmly, confidently. "Evelyn," he said warmly, shaking her hand. "Good to see you again. I wanted to check on progress. Everything running smoothly?" "Yes," she said. "We've addressed all the concerns from the last review, and the team is executing the new strategy." Arthur's eyes scanned her desk, her setup, her notes. Then, just briefly, his gaze flicked to her leg. Evelyn noticed it. He nodded once, subtly. No words needed. She understood. He leaned back in his chair. "I'm glad I met you in person. You handle pressure well. Better than I expected." Evelyn allowed herself a small, professional smile. "Thank you." Arthur paused, then spoke in a tone softer than before. "I want to make something clear. I'm here to support talent, not appearance. Last night proved that to me. Don't let anyone's opinion of you affect your work. Ever again." Evelyn felt the words sink in. Years of avoiding attention, of hiding her leg, of self-consciousness, it didn't need to define her anymore. Over the following weeks, the office atmosphere changed drastically. Lauren was reassigned, quietly but effectively. Evelyn stepped into her new role with a mix of professionalism and quiet authority. Employees who had whispered behind her back now approached her for guidance. Even Amanda, who had mocked her openly, began asking for advice on project strategy. Evelyn treated everyone the same, professional, polite, but firm. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The power dynamic had already shifted. Meetings were no longer a source of anxiety. Evelyn could speak freely, present ideas confidently, and lead discussions without the constant background noise of judgment or pity. Her coworkers adapted quickly, some reluctantly, some with visible relief that the tension in the office had finally eased. Even casual Friday events were different. Evelyn didn't feel compelled to hide her prosthetic leg anymore. She chose stylish trousers or dresses depending on the occasion, but it was her choice now. No whispers followed. No eyes lingered in mockery. The change wasn't only external. Internally, Evelyn felt stronger, more secure in her identity. She had spent years adjusting to a world that didn't always accommodate difference, and now she saw that her competence, professionalism, and resilience were valued far more than appearances. Walking down K Street, the heart of DC's business district, Evelyn felt a quiet confidence. People moved around her, busy with their lives, but she moved differently. She didn't shrink. She didn't avert her gaze. Her prosthetic leg was a part of her story, not a secret to hide, but a symbol of how far she had come. Arthur's involvement in the company had a ripple effect. Not only was Evelyn promoted, but the culture shifted. Policies became more inclusive. Employees who had been marginalized or underestimated found their voices heard. Evelyn, who had been quietly competent for years, now became a figure people respected and looked to for leadership. Her relationship with Arthur remained professional but supportive. He continued to check in periodically, not as a manager, not as a judge, but as someone who recognized talent and understood the struggles she had faced. And each time he briefly acknowledged her prosthetic leg, a quiet nod, a subtle glance, it reminded Evelyn of one simple truth: she was not defined by it. She never had been. Months later, the company held another investor dinner. This time, Evelyn attended wearing a stylish dress she chose freely, not out of necessity. People noticed, of course. She had always had an eye for fashion, but there were no whispers. No judgments. Only admiration, subtle, professional, respectful. Arthur stood near the podium, speaking with executives. When he caught Evelyn's eye, he gave a small, private smile. Evelyn smiled back, confident, calm, and secure. She realized, in that moment, that the humiliation she had feared so much had never been about the dress, or the leg, or appearances. It had been about perception, how others assumed they could define her worth. And now, she knew she was beyond that. Evelyn Noah had arrived, not just in position or title, but in life. She had faced judgment, mockery, and the urge to hide a vital part of herself. She had endured whispers and sideways glances. She had confronted her own self-consciousness and transformed it into quiet confidence. Her promotion, backed by the investor who understood resilience, became more than a career milestone. It became a symbol. People could be seen, truly seen, and still thrive. She had claimed her space in the office, in the industry, and in her own life. No one would ever reduce her to whispers again. No one would decide her worth based on what she hid or revealed. And Evelyn, finally, could walk through the world with the quiet, unshakable confidence she had earned. The past was behind her. The judgment of others no longer mattered. She was recognized, respected, and unstoppable. And for the first time in years, Evelyn smiled without hesitation. She had not just survived. She had triumphed. Subscribe for a new story tomorrow.